Dear students, from its inception as a distinct discipline devoted to the scientific study of how people influence and are influenced by others, social psychologists have explored the nature of leadership. No one discipline can claim the analysis of leadership as its sovereign dominion, but social psychologists emphasize on the scientific study of how people influence and respond to the influence of others makes it entirely appropriate that a collection of chapters written by the best minds in that field should stand beside one's examining leadership from the humanities on the one hand and political science on the other. Social psychology has much to say about leadership. Leadership depends on the habits and dominating attitude in a few people and submissive behavior in others. Even in a spontaneous play group, some children tend to dominate the others in regard to what shall be done and how. Of course, we need not assume that these aggressive traits are necessarily inborn. They are frequently the results of conditioning in the family group. However, the fact remains that in every group situation where control is not already standardized in codes and a hierarchy of officers, men and women differ in their tendencies to step forward and take a lead. It is also evident that although the institutionally determined superior person may also be a leader, the mere prestige attached to a dominant office in any hierarchy does not necessarily constitute leadership. The boss of a prison chain gang is not, strictly speaking, a leader, nor is the president of a corporation, the head of a church, or even an elected political officer. To attain true leadership, men of institutional position must be able to enlist interest and to get themselves voluntarily accepted as pace setters by being effective communicators. Communication networks. There may be certain features in the very structure of a group that may bring about the emergence of the leader quite independent of personality factors. In order to study this aspect, communication networks are artificially imposed to vary the direction of permissible communication and the openness of the various channels between group members. Experimentally, 4-person networks and 5-person networks have been designed. In the following diagram, the circles represent positions and lines represent communicating channels. It will be observed that in some networks like the wheel, the chain, and why one person occupies a centralized position. He or she has access to more information than the persons in any other position. In contrast, the positions in the circle and ComCon are all equivalent, none being more central than the others. It would be expected that a person in the most central position of the wheel, the chain, or Y would assume the functions of a leader in obtaining and in distributing information and will help crucially in solving problems confronted by the group. Bavelas and Leavitt were the first to investigate systematically the social and psychological consequences of network variations. Leavitt presented the problem of discovering the single symbol that each member held in common on a card containing several symbols. The result showed that stable organizations developed by the 4th or 5th trial in the more centralized network but not in the circle network. The central subject transmitted more messages than any other subject in the centralized groups. It was found that he or she also enjoyed his job more than those who occupied the peripheral positions. Further, The person occupying the central position was typically designated the leader by the other members on a post-experimental questionnaire. The results also showed that the circle was typically the most inefficient network. The persons in this network sent many more messages than in other kinds of networks. Also, they made significantly more errors in attempting to identify the common symbol. However, the subjects in the circle network enjoyed their jobs more than the peripheral members in the centralized groups. Subsequent research has confirmed the two main findings of Leavitt. Centralized networks are more efficient than the non-centralized networks, and the personal satisfaction is often greater in the decentralized circle or COMCON than in the centralized networks with many peripheral members. In a recent review of such studies, Shaw says that centralized networks are more effective in solving simple problems of information exchange, but decentralized networks are more effective when a group is faced with complex problems. When the problem is difficult, every person in the decentralized network contributes his suggestions to all the members, thus increasing the total information available to the group. Thus, these research studies on communication networks have shown how leadership emergence is strikingly affected by the communication arrangements. Communication and leadership. In any small group, observation reveals that only one or two persons speak a great deal and others say very little. This has been found to be so whether the group is structured or unstructured, whether the problem being discussed is general or specific, whether the members of the group are friends or strangers, whether the size of the group is small or large. This happens in the house when friends and relatives meet, in the seminar class, and in the parliament. This is why in a seminar class or in a group discussion, restrictions are placed on those who speak frequently and too long, while those who do not speak are persuaded to make their contribution. It has been found that the amount of communication by members of a group follows a logarithmic or exponential curve. Regardless of the size of the group, the most talkative member does about 40% of the communicating, and the amount of communication by the other members drops off sharply. In an 8-member group, 2 persons contribute 60% of the conversation. The third contributes 14%, and the remaining 5 members the balance of 26% between them. Thus, the fact that one person does most of the talking seems virtually to be a universal characteristic of groups. The most active member in terms of communication also tends to be the leader of the group because he or she has the most influence on the group. He or she determines the course of conversation. He or she initiates interactions by asking questions. He or she receives most of the replies. Further, he or she makes most of the suggestions and gives most of the orders. He or she tends to play the central role, whatever the group is doing. An outside observer would consider him the group's leader, and this is confirmed by the members of the group also when they are questioned. Generally, the person who talks the most is perceived as the leader by the rest of the group. Thus, the amount of communication is a critical determinant of leadership. Bevlas and others demonstrated this effect. Students were divided into 4-man groups and were given a problem to discuss for 10 minutes. An observer recorded the amount of time each man spoke and the number of times he or she spoke. After the discussion session, the subjects were asked to fill out a questionnaire in which they were asked to rank the other subjects on general leadership ability and other characteristics. In the second session, each subject had a small box with a red and a green light in front of him, which only he or she could see. Some subjects were told that they would receive feedback on their performance. If the red light went on, it would indicate that they had been hindering the discussion. If the green light went on, it would indicate that their contribution was helpful. Thus, they were either negatively or positively reinforced. One subject who was at the bottom on both verbal output and in the ranking by others was selected from each group. He or she was positively reinforced whenever he or she spoke by the flash of green light, while the rest of the group were negatively reinforced for most of their interventions. In the third session, there were no lights. It was found that the person who contributed only 16% of verbal output and who was rated low by others in the first session was able to contribute 37% when he or she was positively reinforced in the second session and was ranked high. In the third session, when there was no reinforcement, he or she continued to put in 27% of verbal output and was ranked high. Thus, positive reinforcement made him speak more, and this made the others to give him a high rank as a leader. And this effect persisted even when he or she was not receiving any special encouragement. He or she was not only speaking more, he or she was perceived by the members as being quite active and dominant, and they rated him higher on the leadership scale. Content of communication. Thus, the amount of an individual's communication is one of the determinants of leadership. But the type of his communication is also important. Analyzing the content of communication is much more difficult than merely finding the amount of time one speaks. Bales devised a system that helps in such analysis. Every interaction or communication can be placed in one of the 12 broad categories: showing disagreement or agreement, tension or tension release, solidarity or antagonism. All these 6 categories are emotional. The next 6 categories are cognitive, giving or asking for suggestions, opinions or information. The categories refer only to verbally expressed items. According to Bales, one set of talkative persons tend to make supportive, encouraging, conciliatory, and friendly statements. That is, such a person initiates more interactions which fall into the categories of showing solidarity, tension release, and agreement than others. He or she also asks more questions than others, seeking information, opinion, or suggestions. The other set of talkative persons come to the forefront when some task has to be carried out. The communications of such a person fall into the categories of giving suggestions, opinions, and information regarding the task on hand. Bales has called the first type the social or socio-emotional leaders and the second type the task leaders. While the former person concentrates more on the social aspects of the situation and tries to keep the group running smoothly and happily, the latter concentrates on getting the work done. It looks as if groups actually have 2 different kinds of leaders. The social leader is one about whom the group revolves, since he or she fulfills the socio-emotional aspects. The task leader is able to organize the group in carrying out a specific task. The social leader is agreeable, conciliatory, and concerned about the well-being of the members and their personal feelings. The task leader is firm, directive, efficient, and concerned about getting the job done. Thus, the qualities of 2 types of leaders appear to be antithetical. One who is conciliatory may not be firm and directive. The members of the group must be able to elect the leader who is able to fulfill the needs of the group. When tasks have to be done, the group will have to choose the task leader so that he or she can get the job done. If it chooses the social leader under such conditions, it may find itself left with only social and emotional satisfactions, but far away from the realization of the fulfillment of the tasks necessary for its survival in the economic, military, or other fields. Some leadership studies in India, Uday Parikh has brought together a few studies on rural leadership. Some sociologists have identified 5 types of leaders in a community development block. Traditional, who belong to the powerful families of the dominant caste. Political, the elected leaders. Opinion-making leaders to whom village people go for seeking advice. Decision-making leaders and caste leaders. It was also found that social status based on caste has influenced leadership even in elections. Members of the higher castes get a great preference than the members of the lower castes. The lower caste members themselves do not prefer the members of their own caste. It was found that each village has a number of leaders. Traditional leadership plays an important part in rural life because the traditional leaders have sound economic position and high social status. In another study, Baijnath Singh reports that kinship and age are 2 important factors determining leadership in the village. Educational attainment is not a factor. Halland reports in his study that 40% of the leaders were illiterate and 45% had inherited leadership. Konongo and others in their study found that out of 6 prominent leaders, 5 were of the same caste and were related to each other. And these persons were the leaders in village panchayat, school committee, youth club and cooperative society. The leaders perceived themselves as being democratic, taking decisions on the basis of the wishes of the group. Singh and Arya have set up a paradigm of 3 pairs of leadership: authoritarian, non-authoritarian, task-oriented, interpersonal-oriented, and self-oriented, community-oriented. It was found that with respect to value orientation, the leaders as well as non-leaders tended to be conservative, fatalistic, and non-authoritarian. Generally, the leaders as well as non-leaders preferred leaders to be community-oriented, non-authoritarian, while the leaders preferred those who are task-oriented, the non-leaders preferred those who were interpersonal-oriented. In their study of the behavioral characteristics of effective village leaders, Uday Parikh and others report that the characteristics of effective leaders are ability to raise contributions, ability to mobilize people for creating common facilities, ability to help people to secure jobs, and the ability in crisis times to mediate between the disputants, arrange governmental help, loans, etc. The characteristics of ineffective leaders are obstructing public work, misappropriating public funds, creating disputes and dividing people, blaming others and not keeping promises. Gang raid in the case study of Panchayat election found that while the members of the higher caste continue to play a very important role in power structure of the village, the power of exercising vote has made the members of the lower castes important. The higher caste people have begun to see the importance of the numerical strength of the members of the lower castes. Since independence, a large number of formal organizations have been set up at the village level as at the district, state, and national levels. The studies of leadership, however, show that the old characteristics of caste and kinship play a prominent role in the election of leaders to these formal organizations. Leadership continues to be based on ascription rather than achievement, in spite of the fact that the election process is based on achievement. Ascription factors are strengthened by the continuation of economic power in the village, namely ownership of land, among those who belong to the upper castes. These studies, however, reveal some new trends, namely the influence of education and the fact that the members of the lower castes are now conscious of their numerical strength. Still, it is impossible to foresee the time when leadership in the village will be influenced largely, if not wholly, by factors based on achievement like education and non-land based wealth. Conclusion. Let us conclude by emphasizing that in the animal world, the most powerful animal is the leader, but in human society, physical proofs alone is not sufficient. Yet, the importance of the qualities of physical power and an attractive personality is not inconsiderable. One can often see intellectual ability and an attractive physical personality going together in the human leader. By his studies, Partridge has proved that all the individuals who scored the highest in the army alpha tests were tall, attractive, and of an independent nature. This view, held by Partridge, is one-sided because one often finds a complete lack of physical charm in intellectual giants and leaders. One only need be reminded of Socrates and Chanakya. On the other hand, it would be equally incorrect and baseless to state that in the modern world only intellectual achievements are enough to bring leadership to an individual. Actually, in order to become leader, an individual should be possessed of many qualities of the personality and in particular skill in behaving in addition to physical and intellectual qualities. However, the mere fact of the existence of these qualities in an individual is not sufficient insurance of successful leadership. It is true that the leader possesses in innate form the qualities of leadership, but Plato observed correctly that he also requires to be educated. In a democracy, leaders can be discovered and created through education and public programs. For this, responsible tasks should be entrusted to the men and women of the younger generation. They should be given the opportunity of coming forward and expressing themselves. Youth festivals should be organized in order that the youngsters may be able to display their qualities. In this way, when there will always be new leaders to replace the older and retired leaders, the society and the nation will be able to progress constantly and at a fast pace.